We're all obviously aware of the fraud in Minnesota, the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of fraud. But the incompetency of the bureaucracy goes far deeper than that. What was a blurb on the news, it was literally 10 seconds on the local Fox 9 News when this story came out. Not a lot of people have heard about this. Gee, I can't imagine why. Raises for Minnesota nursing home workers will be delayed because of bureaucratic error. Bureaucratic error. Now, I'm going to read a couple of pull quotes from this, and then we're just going to kind of go over a couple of things. Bureaucratic error. Long anticipated raises for thousands of Minnesota nursing home workers will be delayed because the Minnesota Department of Human Services failed to complete the necessary steps to receive approval and funding from the federal government. They didn't complete the steps. You know, sometimes you forget to, cross your I's and dot your lowercase j's. Well, let's find out why. We weren't fully aware of the state rule that required approval by December 1st in order for the new wages to be enforceable, said Christy Groom, State Director of Government Relations at Department of Health and Human Services at a meeting of the board on Thursday. We certainly share in your frustration, and we apologize. DHS started the process of securing federal approval on Monday. On Monday. Let's just go back and see when this was. This was December 12th. So this was just a few days ago. Good to know they're right on top of it. Can you believe this? This is good stuff, isn't it? DHS started the process of securing federal approval on Monday. The agency posted notice of the proposed changes to Medicaid reimbursement rates that will fund the raises, which starts a 30-day public comment period. After that, the agency can submit its request to Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which has at least 90 days to review the application. After federal approval, the higher reimbursement rates funding these raises can start 30 days later, which means realistically looking at April for these raises to kick in. April. Should have been kicked in already. Now, why do I consider this a big deal? We have a state that is at this point so rife with fraud, specifically through that department, and they were just unaware. There are 7,000 employees in the Minnesota Department of Human Services, but they were just unaware. 7,000 employees in the Minnesota Department of Human Services, but they were just unaware. Somebody just didn't read the fine print, I guess. Or maybe they were too busy making sure that $104 million in housing fraud was distributed properly. We just had the federal attorney say that fraud in Minnesota Medicare, Medicaid services could be $9 billion. $9 billion. This is a department, again, that has 7,000 employees, is at this point likely responsible for fraud in the hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps billions of dollars, And they were just unaware. We weren't fully aware. I mean, do you expect us to read everything? That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. Because if you read everything and you actually do your job, maybe you would have found out a long time ago that the Minnesota taxpayer is the largest funder of Al-Shabaab. How some of the state's welfare funds ended up in the hands of a terror group. And of course, you had the Star Tribune come out, and they did their exceptional quality of journalism as soon as they heard about this story. And what do you think they did? If you said debunk it, that's what they tried to do. They tried to point out that no funds were directly, I can't bring it up because Star Tribune is a pay site, and I wouldn't pay the hammer and sickle 1 red cent. Although they would take it if it was red because, well, you communists. I'm going to go into this article just briefly to kind of point something out. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of the Somalia fraud story is the scale, with total costs running into the billions of taxpayer dollars. That raises the question, what happened to all that money? The Somali fraud ring have sent huge sums of remittances or money transfers from Minnesota to Somalia. According to reports, an estimated 40% of households in Somalia get remittances from abroad. In 2023 alone, the Somali diaspora sent back $1.7 billion, more than the Somali's government's budget for that year. That's an amazing amount of money leaving the United States. Our investigation reveals for the first time that some of the money has been directed to an even more troubling destination, the Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab. According to multiple law enforcement sources, Minnesota Somali community has sent untold millions through a network of halawas, informal clan-based money traders that have wound up in the coffers of Al-Shabaab. According to Glenn Kearns, a retired Seattle Police Department detective who spent 14 years on a federal joint terrorism task force, the Somalis ran a sophisticated money network spanning from Seattle to Minneapolis and were routing significant amounts of cash on commercial flights from the Seattle airport to Hala networks in Somalia. One of those networks Kern discovered sent $40 million abroad in a single year. The amount of money was staggering, Kern said. Kern's investigation eventually expanded to Minnesota, where he realized the same thing was happening. I worked on it for 5 years, Kern said. We had sources going into Halawas sent money. We went to Minnesota and pulled all of their records, and well, shit. All the Somalis sending out money were on DHS benefits. How does that make sense? We had good sources tell us this is welfare fraud. Kearns then investigated the Halawas in Somalia that were receiving money transfers. He determined primarily through human sources that significant funds were being sent from America to Al-Shabaab networks in Somalia, where the money was intended for Al-Shabaab or not. Kearns says they were taking their cut. A second official who worked on the Minneapolis JTTF confirms the story's general structure. The former official who requested to remain anonymous worked on 2 terrorism cases that intersected with the Minnesota Somali community and has studied the flow of funds from Minnesota to Somalia. Every scrap of economic activity in America, in the Twin Cities, in America, throughout Western Europe, anywhere Somalis are concentrated, every cent that is sent back to Somalia benefits Al-Shabaab in some way, the former official said. For every dollar that is transferred from the Twin Cities to Somalia, Al-Shabaab is taking a cut of it. The point is, everything that goes into Somalia goes through them before it goes anywhere else, and they take their cut. It's like the mob. In the Star Tribune story, what they tried to point out to you is that no money is directly going there. That's not the case being made by this story. The case being made by this story is money being sent there. Some of it might be going there purposely for that, but a lot of it is going there, getting filtered through, and what remains is going to the rest of them. I'm just going to finish with this. It'll be quick. We're almost to the end. A third source who spoke on a condition of anonymity described the close links between the Somali American community in Minnesota and Islamic terror groups abroad. 10 years ago, the source was recruited as an independent contractor for a 3-letter agency investigating the Minnesota men who had joined or attempted to join ISIS that year. A Homeland Security Task Force report found that Minnesota led the nation in a number of Americans who had joined or attempted to join ISIS. Of the 58 Americans who had done so, nearly half came from Minnesota. And if you recall, a couple years ago, this was a huge local story of the recruitment of local Somali men. This was a huge story locally. Didn't make much news nationally, and why would it? But this is something that we've had to tackle now for years here. We are 2 paragraphs out from the end. Scott Johnson, who has covered these and related stories for years, attended several of those men's trials, reporting on them for the City Journal. He noted that the Minnesota men gave the outward appearance of American assimilation, including being sophisticated users of social welfare benefits. The relationship is ongoing. This is a third rail conversation. But the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer, the third source said. There is an issue here that is real. And if there's ever an event that is traceable back to these funds or to the people from this area, then the situation will take a whole new set of optics. The reason I covered this so extensively is because you have this department of 7,000 people who have absolutely made sure that funding goes through on these fraudulent programs of up to $9 billion, according to federal prosecutors, of possibly up to $9 billion. As of now, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And this department, responsible for all this fraud and being a funder of a terror organization, were just unaware. They were just unaware. The incompetency of the bureaucracy is frightening, especially in Minnesota. The number one purpose of any bureaucracy is to justify its own existence. This department has gone out of its way to justify its elimination. This is obscene. Thousands of Minnesota healthcare workers will not get a raise because the department was unaware. Was just unaware. 7,000 employees, unaware. Hundreds of millions, perhaps billions in fraud, unaware. Funding a terrorist group, unaware. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That we have a department in the state that is run amok, one of many, and something needs to be done. Nothing's going to happen with the Walz administration, obviously. SOB is still leading in the polls. Can you believe that? It's because the Twin Cities are filled with dolts. That's all I got. Thanks.